Welcome to Bird Ultrasound Tips and Tricks. This tip and trick is called Rolling Stones. Now you may know the Rolling Stones as being a rock band with their famous emblem that they had with their rather prominent tongue. And of course this is what the young Rolling Stones look like with, of course, Mick Jagger on the vocals and the wonderful Keith Richards playing guitar, etc. And this group of young guys produced many albums and lots of wonderful music for several decades, and of course they're still going quite strong really and still playing gigs. Now sadly they're down to four with the very sad demise of Charlie Watts, the drummer, a few years ago. But if you have a look at the other four remaining members, they're well embalmed, aren't they? They've had a lifestyle of rock and roll, sex and drugs over the years, and clearly it hasn't been too bad for them because Mick is now 81 and Keith, remarkably, is 80 years old, and whatever he's put through his system seems to be still going okay, and he's still producing music, so good luck to them. But what have Rolling Stones got to do with musculoskeletal ultrasound? This is something I'm going to try and explain to you. First, you need to understand where the name Rolling Stones came from. So how did they come up with the name Rolling Stones? I suspect it came about through this guy. And this guy is Bob Dylan. Now, Bob Dylan, a very famous American composer and singer-songwriter. He's actually been awarded a Nobel Prize for Literature because of the depth and the intricacy of his lyrics, which is rather remarkable. And one of the most famous lyrics that just about everyone knows is this lyric, that a rolling stone gathers no moss. It's interesting, I was teaching on the weekend and I had a group of maybe 40 or 50 young sonographers there, and I asked them if they knew who Bob Dylan was, and most of them looked at me with blank faces saying no idea who he is. Some said, look, I've heard of him, heard my dad talk about him, or my mum mentioned him once upon a time, but couldn't really tell you anything. So I went back a step and said, what about the Rolling Stones? And I was pleased that about half the audience knew who the Rolling Stones were, but I was still rather flabbergasted that the other half of this rather young sonographer audience didn't know who the Rolling Stones were. But then I said, can you finish this sentence? A rolling stone gathers, and just about all of them chimed in and said, no moss. So everybody knew that quote from Bob Dylan, even though they didn't know who Bob Dylan was. So if a rolling stone gathers no moss, I suspect this is where the Rolling Stones got their name from. But the metaphor that I want to use for an explanation of anisotropy in musculoskeletal ultrasound is, rather than a rolling stone gathers no moss, how about a rolling stone gathers anisotropy? Because that's really what happens, and let me see if I can explain this to you. So anisotropy, of course, are alterations in the perceived echotexture of a structure as a result of the direction of the ultrasound beam. So if you look at the supraspinatus tendon, which we've got here coming down to its anthesis, you can see that the way that the collagen fibers twist around this called a corner here. So when we put a flat ultrasound transducer across the top here, we're going to be hitting these fibers fairly specular, almost at 90 degrees, but these fibers here we're hitting at a very, very oblique angle, which means that the sound is going to be lost to the receiving transducer crystal, which means it's going to end up like this, looking like a hypoechoic area, which we can then misinterpret as being some sort of a tendinopathy event here, or a partial thickness articular surface tear, when in fact it is purely an artifact. So how do we prevent anisotropy, and how do we stop ourselves doing what I call MSU, which is making stuff up, of course, and of course you can replace the S word with something a bit more rock and roll if you like. So a basic principle of ultrasound is when a sound beam comes in, an angle of incidence equals the angle of reflection. So in other words, if you're looking at this piece of collagen here, if this is, say, the Achilles tendon or the patella tendon or a supraspinatus tendon, if you hit that at 90 degrees, so straight like that, all of the reflected energy will come straight back to the transducer. If you hit it obliquely like this at 45 degrees, most of the energy will be reflected away and it will never come back to the transducer that sent it, and it's going to look dark or black on the ultrasound image. So a rolling stone gathers anisotropy. So how about if we put our rolling stone on these two images? Now these are long axis views of the long head of biceps tendon of the shoulder, and there's my rolling stone. Now, if we then put a rolling stone over here, you can see that it's sitting in this location, and then let's see what happens. Now, if the stone stays stationary, it means we have the optimized image. If the stone rolls, it means that the image is not optimized and we're suffering from anisotropy. And so when we push the button, off it goes, it rolls down the hill. That tells me that this is a lousy picture and this is an excellent picture. But if you look at the architecture of the long-headed biceps tendon here, you can see the fibrillar detail is superb. You can see it's a really high-quality picture. Whereas exactly the same tendon here looks washed out, looks hypoechoic, looks a little tendinopathic, and this is, of course, artifactual. So a good sonographer producing premium images will never have the stone rolling. It'll sit stationary because it's sitting on a flat tendon with the direction of the fibers being exactly at 90 degrees to the incoming ultrasound beam that's looking at them. If you're a lazy sonographer, or if you don't get enough heel and toe pressure on your transducer, you don't take the care that's required, then you have oblique fibers, the sound's coming down here, it's being reflected out this way, therefore it's not coming back to the crystal that was listening for it, and therefore we get a hypoechoic, grubby looking ultrasound picture, and so the rolling stone certainly does gather anisotropy. It bothered me even more so that the sonographers that I was speaking to on the weekend didn't know who Bob Dylan was, and only half of them had heard of the Rolling Stones. Then when I went to work today at Modbury Hospital, I was working with a delightful young sonographer who is bright as a spark and really is turning into a fabulous sonographer. But I asked her, who is this fellow Bob Dylan? And she looked at me and said, I've got no idea. And I said, well, Bob Dylan plays handball for the USA, and he won a gold medal during the LA Olympics. And so she immediately went across to her computer and Googled up Bob Dylan handball. And not surprisingly, there's a whole lot of pictures of Bob Dylan come up, but none of him playing handball, just lots of him playing guitar, harmonica, and singing beautifully. So I thought, this is not going to work, not with my target audience, because really my target audience, let's face it, is young sonographers, and young sonographers just don't know who Bob Dylan is, so I needed another metaphor. So I tried this on for size, and you might remember this advertisement for Maltesers, which is quite wonderful, and I think everyone knows what a Malteser is. So here's a Malteser, and this is the advertisement that was played.
Going right round, isn't it? Just go right for now. Yeah, try out the next one. What, I'm still going round? Oh, gosh. I'm going right. That's it. Keep going right. In my mind, there's another place for me. Hey! Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right again. You don't know where you're going, do you? Yeah, no, go right. Just keep going round. I can see what you're doing, you know. Which way? Right!
So you can see that the Maltesers were rolling there, and these were clearly a couple of backpacking young ladies having a great time in Europe and getting stuck on a roundabout as you can when you're travelling around Europe in a cheap rental car. So if you don't know who Bob Dylan is, you know what a rolling Malteser is, and so let's just change the colour of the stone slightly to a Malteser. And the same principle applies, is that a rolling Malteser gathers anisotropy, as you can see. So you can apply this principle whether you're looking at a tendon, a ligament, joint capsule, a nerve, and even muscles really have anisotropic properties. So you need to have these fibers parallel to the ultrasound transducer face at all times. So you can see here with the long head of biceps tendon how at the moment the Malteser starts to roll, you can see that the image quality degrades significantly. And then on the short axis image, you can also tilt the transducer up and down. Now, while you don't get the impression that anything's going to roll here, you can certainly see that you can produce anisotropy and then correct for it. And it's worth noting here that you can see the way that anisotropy not only affects the long head of biceps tendon, but it very significantly affects the deltoid muscle as well. You lose all of that fine detail in the deltoid when you angle the transducer slightly. You can use exactly the same principle for the biceps brachii insertion, and this is a really common one because when you do the pronator teres acoustic window technique for the distal biceps brachii insertion onto the radial tuberosity, it's really hard to stop the Malteser rolling. You need to use a lot of transducer pressure on the distal end of the transducer, and you've almost got to give the patient a bit of a bruise. You've got to push quite hard into the soft tissues, and I always apologise to the patient and say this is going to be quite firm pressure, but what it does is it gives me a picture like the one here in the bottom left-hand corner with superb fibrillar detail and really good detail of the enthesis of the biceps brachii inserting onto that radial tuberosity. And if you're just a little bit lazy because you don't want to push that hard on the patient's skin, you can see the image quality is really degraded, and who knows if this is just an empty space here, who knows if this is really a tendon or not. This image here is undeniably a superior image. It even works with a hip joint capsule. So here's the hip joint. You can see that as we tilt and the Malteser rolls, you can see the way that the joint capsule, the iliofemoral ligament here, becomes degraded in textural properties. So this image here with the Malteser rolling downhill here is not very well optimized, whereas here where the Malteser is stationary, you can see the way that the image is optimized beautifully. This is a gluteus minimus tendon. You can see here the Malteser is rolling from right to left, would roll down that way. Here it's nice and stationary, and you can see as we rock the probe back and forwards, when the Malteser or the stone has stopped rolling, you're going to get the premium picture. The moment you allow it to roll again, you can see that the image degrades. So whenever you're looking at any ultrasound picture in the musculoskeletal system and you're looking at a structure in the long axis, whether it be the median nerve, whether it be the anterior talofibular ligament, whether it be the long head of biceps tendon, the biceps brachii, gluteus minimus, or a hip joint capsule, whatever it is, just ask yourself, if you put a stone on it, would it roll? And if it will roll, you've got anisotropy problems. And if you don't know who the rolling stones are, just think about chocolate. Who doesn't love chocolate? And if your Malteser is stationary, then you have success. If your Maltesers are rolling and someone else is eating them, that's not an ideal situation to have, and you need to correct it to get the optimum image. I hope you've enjoyed this tip and trick presentation on anisotropy and rolling stones. If you've enjoyed it, please visit birdultrasound.com.au, where you can enjoy lots and lots of similar material. Happy scanning, and bye for now.